Okay, folks, we are recording Chapter 11 lecture, and I think this one's going to go pretty quick. I don't think there's a whole lot of code demonstration I need to do on this one because the topic is largely not new to us, and that's working with images and icons. And so there will be minimal code demonstrations because we've seen a lot of this already. Just a little bit more details is really what it's boiling down to, is a review and slightly more details than we've gone into before. So when working with images and icons, here's our list of objectives. We're going to do things like image rollovers we've never done before. We're going to talk about some different types of images that we've never talked about. A little bit of this HTML tag called, figure and fig caption. Not super widely used, but it is out there. This picture and source elements working with images, so that'll be new to us. And so so we're going to get in. We're also going to talk about SVG, scalable vector graphics. I think I forget who brought that up the other day. Understanding what is an SVG and also how do we get them into our site. So when we're looking at the common images that can be used on the web, these are the list of the common ones. There are others out there. This top one, the ongoing internet debate is how do you pronounce this? Some people pronounce it with a hard G, GIF. Others pronounce it with a soft G, GIF. I think everyone, when they first see it, wants to pronounce it GIF. The developer of the technology, the person who made the file type, he pronounces it with a soft G. So I say if you invent something, I think you get the rights to determine how to pronounce it. And so I pronounce it GIF, but you might call me wrong, and that's fine. What are these good for? These are most commonly used in animated, like avatars on your forums. You could do little animated GIFs. So that you see those all over the internet, right? A lot of them are just humor related. Also, if you have a real simple logo that's not many colors, spelled animated wrong. If you have a simple logo that's not many colors, like real simple colors, red, green, then these store really well as GIFs. JPEGs are most commonly your photos, because if you think of a photo, you're thinking of, if you're just got a photo of the sky, you got so many shades of blue and white, and if the sun is setting, you got all sorts of shades of red and yellow, and there's certainly more colors. So when you save a GIF, it's known as lossless compression, and so the image file size does compress, but you really don't lose any quality of the image when you compress the file size. JPEGs, on the other hand, every time you save a JPEG to a new hard drive, to a new location, you might notice that JPEG becomes more and more pixelated, because every time you save over a JPEG and save it over and save it over, it compresses that JPEG down, and the image becomes more pixelated and loses quality. So the first time you take a photo from a photograph or from an SD card and save it onto your computer, you probably have a nice large file size. Everything's really clear in the photo. And then if you were to take it from your hard drive and upload it to Facebook, which is a separate server, you upload your photo to Facebook, you lose a little bit of image quality there. So image quality goes down when you take it from the SD card to your computer. It's a pretty seamless transfer there. But then when you upload it to Facebook, okay, the quality goes down. Then let's say your mother likes the photo that you took, and your mother wants to save the Facebook photo onto her computer. Okay, so now you've taken it from the SD card to your computer, from your computer to Facebook's server, from Facebook's server now onto your mother's computer. Okay, every iteration of that JPEG being saved over and over again, it's going to become more and more pixelated. And by the time your mom opens up that photo on her computer, it's not going to look good anymore. Okay, that's because JPEGs use what's called lossy compression. And compression, obviously, you're shrinking the file size down. But what happens is when you shrink the file size, you're losing the quality. And so a lot of what you're trying to find on web pages as a developer, what you're trying to find is a balance. You're trying to find good quality with low file size. So it's a scale. Obviously, high quality has a high file size. So you want to shrink the quality and really, to the point where it's not noticeable. You don't want to notice poor quality, but you want to get the file, you want to shrink the quality so that you can shrink the file size. So you want high quality and low file size. That's really what you're looking for. Big file size means a bigger download. Every time someone wants to view that image, they need to pull that down from your web server. They need to download the image from the web server, and a big image is a bigger download. If you've got a bunch of bigger images, it's going to take longer for your page to load. The longer your page takes to load, the less people like it. No one likes a slow-moving web page. Also, Google, as a search engine, analyzes the speed of your page. If you have a slow-loading page, Google is not likely to recommend your page, as likely to recommend your page as if it was a fast-loading web page. So when you're dealing with photos, these are all really important concepts, because photos are one of the things, along with fonts, that can make a website look good. I mean, when it really boils down to it, your fonts and your photos are two of the biggest things to make good looking websites is good quality photos. Which, by the way, while I'm talking here, earlier in the semester, I recommended, I think this was the site that I recommended. If you want to get free stock photos, okay, you can go to unsplash.com, and these are free high-resolution photos. And so this is a really nice resource that... Did I put it on the wrong monitor? There we go. Do you see it now? Can you hear me now? Cool. So yeah, this is not the only the stock images site, but this is a good one. Again, I don't even remember if this was the site that I recommended earlier in the semester. I think it was. So what it's not legal to do is just go to Google and search for, search for your favorite person, go to Google Images, and then just rip down any photo that you want. Okay, so let me make it clear. This is not, legal. These are any image that is posted online is inherently copyright protected by the website owner. Okay, so if you take an image and you put it on your website, you have a copyright protection. And if someone were to download that image and reuse it without your permission, you could sue them. Okay, the same thing can happen to you. Okay, if you're building a website and you're using images that you do not have permission to use, okay, you can, and it's not unheard of, to get, you can get sued. You can get a cease and desist order, which means take your website down. Okay, so you can get sued. You can have your website taken down. You just can't go on the internet and rip images off. Yeah. Now, there used to be usage rights, and you can get Creative Commons license. And if you look up what a Creative Commons license is, it's a public copyright that enables free distribution of work. Okay, so if you change the usage to Creative Commons, then these are the images that you can use. Now, what you'll notice is I don't have nearly as many pictures of Michael Jordan anymore. I got this football player's butt. I got Dennis Rodman here, but not nearly as many pictures of Michael Jordan. Okay, so you can use Google in that way. Otherwise, you're gonna use a free stock photo, or you can take the photos yourself. Which brings up the idea that when you're building a website for someone, they might not have the photos that they want, and they might ask you as the web developer to come up with the photos. Okay, now that's when you use stock photos. But more than likely, the owner of the business needs to get their own photos, right? So I've made websites before. For example, I've made websites before with for businesses, and they wanted me to go around and take photos of their food, and I was ultimately content development is the responsibility of the business owner. And there's a good reason for that. They know and understand their business way better than you. Okay, so I don't know what a good looking meal should look like in the eyes of the business owner, and so they need to write the content. They need to write the copy, as they say. They need to write the copy. They need to take the photos. They need to provide the content. It's just a message, because as I've mentioned before, we are 1/4 of the way through this class. Your final project is to build a website for a client that you have to find. Okay, so we're 1/4 of the way. We're getting to a point where not too long, you're going to have some skills where you can develop a site for somebody. Definitely by the halfway point of this class. Okay, so by day 40, you'll have the skills to build a site for somebody and get it live on the internet. You'll have till day 80 to do so. Just keep in mind, as you're building a site for somebody, they have to give you the content, which is also typically the slowest part of building a site for somebody, is waiting for the client to give you content. Okay, and remember that. Okay, because that's probably the most truthful thing I've ever said is that you will be waiting, especially once you become decent at this and you can do it at a decent speed, right? Typically what takes the longest is waiting for content from the client. Yeah, you can have family as a client. The question is, can I have family as a client? Yes. That's fine. It's not ideal, but what can you do? Pings are used also for photographs. Here's the thing about GIFs that I didn't say. GIFs can be transparent. So GIFs can be transparent, meaning you could take Photoshop, whatever, I'm not going to open a Photoshop, but you could take Photoshop and you can delete a background color and make the photo see-through for transparency. JPEGs, however, cannot. All right, so there's no JPEG. So what happens more often than not, what happens is that people forget this. They forget that JPEGs cannot have transparency. So they go into Photoshop, they delete the background color, and then they save the image. And what happens is it fills in the transparent areas with white. Because if you save the image as a JPEG, there's no transparencies, and it just fills in the transparent areas with white. So you lose the transparencies. Pings then are used for photographs that can that has allows for transparency. Okay, so pings are generally going to be larger file sizes than your JPEGs. So when you're just comparing JPEGs versus pings, if you don't need transparency, you're probably going to wind up choosing a JPEG. But if you've got a nice photograph that you want part of it to be transparent, you're going to probably wind up with a ping. Okay, the new kid on the block is WebP. WebP is a Google format that's not, my understanding is that WebP is not well supported cross browsers. So I'm not really using WebP very often. I've come across them, especially when you do like Google image searches. I know a lot of those images are WebP. When they talk about lossy, that's the lossy compression that I'm talking about. So the question is, what's the difference between them? Between which two? Well, there's a lot of differences between JPEGs and GIFs. That's where I kind of started off talking about. And they're listed here. I mean, you could see GIFs are animated. They use lossless compression, and they can have transparencies, whereas JPEGs use lossy compression, and they don't allow transparencies. So that's the difference between GIFs and JPEGs. You can see here that WebP claims to have a smaller image size to pings. Which would be nice, and but I don't know how it stacks up against JPEGs, because JPEGs are typically smaller than PNGs as well. So anyways, that's the new kid on the block. Just something to be aware of that you might start seeing a little bit of. Would be, oh, it might help if you see the slide. Yeah. So to answer the question, there's kind of a list of the difference between the two. WebP is a Google image format. Smaller image sizes than PNGs. Kind of a JPEG competitor, and I really don't know if it's going to replace JPEG or not. It's just something to be aware of. Again, and I don't know how it really stacks up. They're both lossy. I'm wondering if it allows for transparency. Supports transparency. So that's a big difference, right? So that's a big difference. If WebP is a competitor to JPEGs, JPEGs do not have transparency and WebP does, yet they're both going to be smaller file formats than PNG. So it's kind of like back in the day you had VHS and beta, right? And beta tapes, and so it was like who's going to win? And then it became, CDs, and I don't know. It's just technology wars. CDs versus DVDs and scalable vector graphics. Here's the thing about scalable vector graphics. So if you're in design, if you're going to school to study design, particularly as probably part of a marketing degree, you're going to learn to design images, and that's not necessarily something that we do here. But if you're in marketing, one of the things that you need to market on is, I keep doing that. Okay. Can you see? Yeah, sorry guys. Let me see. Can you see me now? Am I sharing the right screen? Yeah, that's my bad. So yeah, SVG. If you're studying marketing, you're going to study, how to design marketing materials, pamphlets, brochures, maybe TV commercials, billboards, and I was getting at is billboards. So how do you make an image that fits on a billboard? Well, the answer to that question is you make a scalable vector graphic. And so you use a tool in the Adobe, more than likely in the Adobe suite, called Illustrator. And Illustrator is one tool. There are other tools that allow you to make a small image that can scale up indefinitely. And so you could put it on whatever size, it can scale up. And so literally scalable is the first word in scalable vector graphics. And so you learn to make these images in this manner that can scale up and fit on a billboard. You can use these SVG image files on a website, and it could scale up and still look good, regardless of the screen that it's on. And so if it's going to go on some, if you got an image that's going to be put on some, giant television, or needs to display, your website's going to be on, some giant TV or projector of some sort, something that needs to look good on a really big screen, then you might consider scalable vector graphics. Okay, And what you wind up doing is you wind up using these tools. It's not going to be something we do in this class necessarily, but what you wind up doing is you use Illustrator and you export the SVG. And when you export the SVG, it'll literally give you a chunk of HTML code that has an SVG tag, and you just copy and paste that SVG tag in, and that's how you use the SVG image type. All right, we've already covered image height, width, all these kinds of things. Obviously height and width is for sizing it. Now, it's really, if you're going to use the height and width attribute in HTML, because that's what we're looking at here. These are the attributes of the image tag. So this is obviously in the HTML. If you're going to use these, okay, the best practice is to not use these to resize the image. Okay, and I don't want to harp on it too much, but if your image has a height and a width, whatever it is, you should configure the height and the width in the HTML to match the height and the width of the image itself. It's not a good idea. It's just it boils down to a performance thing. It is slightly better performance for the web page to use the actual dimensions of the image instead of resizing it here. I do it all the time. You do it all the time. If you've ever used height and width, you've probably used it to resize an image. It's just not best for performance considerations. It's actually considered to slow it down, because what it has to do is render the page twice. It draws the page with the default height and width, and then it redraws it. After it finishes, it redraws it with the adjusted height and width. So it has to draw the page twice. It's not good for performance. If you want to use CSS, we've done that specifically for responsive images. Remember, there were two techniques that we learned to change the CSS to make responsive images. And both of them meant leaving the height and width attribute off, so we do not code the height and width attribute in the HTML. And then on one technique, we would just set the width to be 100%. And that would help us have responsive images kind of out of just by writing HTML and CSS. There were two approaches for that. But as you know, any HTML element can have a custom height and a width, and that includes images. So your divs can have a custom height and a width. Your H1s can have a custom height and a width. Images are no exception to that. Yeah, so the question is, would I recommend you resizing it with software or with CSS? The answer is software. I would prefer to resize the image using a software tool, and that way what they download is exactly the height and width of the dimensions that you show on the screen. It really boils down to this. Our computers and our network speeds are so incredibly fast that you might not notice a difference. You probably aren't going to notice a difference. But back in the day, it used to make a difference. And not everyone has blazing fast internet speeds, right? Most people, I would even say in the country, in rural, remote areas, don't have very good internet speed. And so any little thing that you can do to help them with performance is going to make a difference. It could make a difference. So yeah, my general recommendation is if you use either CSS or the height and width attribute, still you want to put the actual height and the actual width. Now, the other thing is, how do I tell the actual height and the actual width? And so, Josh, you just happened to be on my example here. So if I look at this phoenix.jpg and I go to properties, and then I go to details, that's where you see the actual height and width of the image. Okay, and if you want to change that, you can use software, and you can use Microsoft Paint. That's the easiest thing to do. You can right click on edit inside of Windows, and then go to resize, and then click pixels, and you could change this right here. You can change it to 200 by 200. You can uncheck this maintain aspect ratio, 200 by 100. Obviously that doesn't look good, but you get the idea. You can change it in Paint. So you don't need any sort of fancy software, that you have to pay for or anything. Now, when it comes to accessibility, this is a topic that keeps coming up. Accessibility is a concept that we should build a World Wide Web. We should build all of our web pages so that the content is accessible regardless of disabilities, right? And so what are the common disabilities? Well, you've got blindness, you could be deaf, you've got motor skills, and you've got cognitive disabilities. And so these are all things that we have to consider. Okay, now when it comes to images, if your images have useful content, okay, you want to code the alt attribute. Okay, but not all images are useful content. A lot of images are just decorative, right? They just make your page look good, right? So if you have decorative images, you could just leave the alt attribute as an empty string. You literally just say alt equals and then quotes that are empty quotes. And this will help Google identify what images should be described to people that are blind and what images should be skipped and aren't important. There is a CSS property called vertical align. You can get by without this just using margin and padding. But when you look at vertical align, we actually did this a little bit. If you use display inline block, you probably had me show you this vertical align. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Where, if we have some text and we have an image, where vertically is the text next to the image? Bottom, middle, top, these are the different places it can be. And so here's a couple images. If we look at this first, we got an image, and then after the image, we've got some text. And they're all wrapped inside of a paragraph. And we can tell the image, you see how this is done? With inside of the paragraph, we have our image tag. And then we target the image tag and say, well, the text basically next to it, vertical align middle. And so that gets the text next to it aligned, and it's kind of hard to see. You just got to practice this. This isn't the best example, but you can kind of see this one's kind of in the bottom here. You just got to play with the different values to see how it moves the text around next to it. And again, you could use just margin and padding and any other of the spacing tools that we've learned, but mainly margin and padding. So you can get by without vertical lines sometimes. Sometimes it just helps to get the text where you want it. Oh, these are before. That's why. I was like, this is not a good example. This is before the aligned. I missed the title. Before they're aligned. I'm like, they all look at the bottom. What's wrong here? There you go. You can kind of see the difference there. And it's still not the best example, but now they're at least vertical aligned. You can float images, and we work with floats, and so there's really nothing new here. Anytime you float something like an image, a lot of times the next element needs to be cleared, right? We've covered floats probably into the ground by now, especially retesting on that last hands-on test. Hopefully you're tired of floats and you're ready to move on. So they're just kind of showing, hey, I got this images floated, we got this content over the side, and we got this paragraph beneath it. And I would tell you that the layouts that we have done are way more complex than the layouts out of this textbook, so none of this really should be too difficult. There is often, a lot of times, and I said a lot of times and often, but maybe not. I don't see this very often, so let me reword this. We've got these HTML tags called figure and fig caption. Okay, I don't really see this used a lot. Here was the idea behind this. The idea behind this tag figure and fig caption is that a lot of times, and it doesn't have to necessarily be an image and some text associated with an image, but a lot of times there's two different elements that are associated together, like a piece of text and an image. It could be a piece of text and a video. It could be a list and a heading. It could be just a couple of items, and so you wrap them together in a figure. Then you have the image and a caption for that image. And so this is the way that you wrap these two things together. Is with this figure, you put the image or the video or the list or whatever inside of the figure, and then you put the fig caption. And again, so what does this do? Well, those tags tell different devices, maybe your laptop or your mobile device or your tablet, that these two pieces, these two things belong together. And so generally speaking, you're going to find them positioned next to one another. Is the general idea. Is that really these two things are associated, so keep them close by, is the general idea. But I just don't know that they're used that often. But that's the concept, man. Just like anything else, you could change the display. Fig caption by default must be a display inline, and they change it to display block to cause a line break. This is kind of a neat little trick that's kind of a combination of media queries, where we can display an image, different images based on screen size. So this is certainly something we have not done before, and this is a neat chunk of code that says, okay, if our device is at least 960 pixels or wider, let's display this big picture of the mountains. But if it's less wide, let's say if it's between 768 and 960, then let's display this other picture of the mountains, this smaller picture. If it's even smaller than that, if it's between 460 and 768, let's display this really small image of the mountains. Otherwise, let's display this mountains 4. So if it's less than 460, we display mountains 4. And so you might have seen this. I know I've seen it, where you can resize a website and the images that are on the website actually change as you're resizing the window. They're not being responsive, they're just changing. they're different images. So the web page is responding with different images, but the images themselves aren't really shrinking and growing. They're just changing. So that is done with this picture element and the source tag. So this is kind of very similar to media queries. So I do like this slide, and if I'm in your shoes, I'm probably taking note of this slide and keeping that in my code chunks, right? If I got little code chunks that I want to come back to at some point, this is definitely a good one. You could also use it to say, okay, load the WebP if it's available, if the browser supports it. Otherwise, display the PNG. Right? So it'll first try to load the WebP image, but if that's not supported, the backwards compatibility is the PNG. Okay, we've been going since the start of class. I like to take a break every 45 minutes or so. So I'm going to pause here. We'll be back in just a minute. Okay, we're resuming the recording here. A couple more things that you can do with the images. And you see this sometimes where you want a little bit more interactivity on the site as you do an image rollover. And so maybe you have a product and you're selling a t-shirt, and then you hover over the image of the t-shirt and it shows a second image of the t-shirt, right? Or maybe a closer view of it, or just a second image. And so you do see these occasionally. There's a couple of techniques to do that. One is to use CSS. And so if you look at the HTML, all we really have is a paragraph. And that paragraph has an image and ID, image 1. And so then we target image 1 and we use a background image. So instead of using HTML to insert an image, we're using CSS to insert that image. And that would be, the first image, H1. And then you can use a pseudo selector, the hover selector. You can hover other things besides links. You can hover paragraphs. You can hover as they're doing here. When you hover this paragraph, it changes the background image. And so that's a simple way of having one image display when the page loads, having another image display when you hover. Another thing that can be done with images is to create an image map. And image maps, if we look at a little bit of the code here, right, and I'll just highlight the code. They use coordinates to make clickable areas on the page. And so what this winds up doing is if you click this left book, there are coordinates here that kind of mark the outline of this image. And so if you were to click this book, it would take you to mysql.html. It would take you to this page. Obviously, this is a book on MySQL, right? Whereas if you were to click in these coordinates down here, that it would take you to a different page. And so depending on where you click, it would actually navigate you to two different pages. Now, how do you get these coordinates? Well, again, you want to use software. There's software out there that would use, for example, Photoshop, and it would generate this for you. It would generate at least the coordinates for you to use. And so I don't recommend any sort of manual hovering over the image and getting the X and Y coordinates. This is something like, 0 pixels over and 30 pixels down for the first coordinate, and just using X and Y coordinates to plot locations on an image. Okay, so a couple quick concepts that we've covered: image rollovers, as well as image maps. You do have Photoshop, which is a common image editor, and you do have to pay for Photoshop. As a Rankin student, I'm sure you could get a student. They have a cloud access where you could pay a student price. It's still probably expensive on a per month basis. I would probably guess $20-30 a month. I'm not exactly sure. If interested, I do have a free copy of Photoshop. Years ago, Adobe put out for free download, so there's nothing illegal about this. This was right from Adobe. They put out a Creative Suite 2 Photoshop, and so actually, see, I've got a more updated Photoshop, but I do have. If you guys are interested, I can get you an old Photoshop for free. There's also a free software called GIMP. GIMP is another photo editing tool. What's great about Photoshop, and I'm not sure about GIMP, is that Photoshop has a tool called Save for Web. And remember earlier I talked about balancing image size and quality. And that's exactly what this does. This is going to be able to lower your image size without lowering too much quality. And so you can compare all these different settings, GIFs and JPEGs and PNGs, and what is the ideal image and the ideal settings to save an image to get that balance just right. So when you're fighting that balance of quality versus size, Photoshop is basically the industry standard tool that I used to do that. And so I ran all my images through this tool. So I'm very familiar with this tool, again, because what you're trying to do is very important, and getting that quality to image size. So what might you do with Photoshop? You could change the image size, the image type. So what you don't want to do, how old is my copy of Photoshop? My copy of Photoshop, again, Adobe put it out there for free, so you know it's old. I was using Creative Suite 2 in 2006, so it's at least 14 years old. Very old. They charge you $40 to cancel if you use a student plan. That sounds like a rip. But that's just Photoshop. They've got a market share. You could set up animated GIFs with Photoshop. You could delete backgrounds and make transparent images. You could also get the coordinates for an image map using Photoshop. This is really not a good, demonstration. Let me pop open Photoshop here. I'll show you what it actually looks like with a transparent background. So this is something that this is an image that I worked on very recently, and you can kind of see the corners here with the checkered background, and so I deleted the background so that this became transparent, so I could put this image on whatever area, and if I wanted to maybe delete, this star so that that became transparent. We would use like a quick selection tool. You could see that it selected the star. I could delete it and that becomes transparent as well. So Photoshop's an awesome tool. It's a lot of fun. If you've never worked with Photoshop before, I recommend spending some hours on YouTube and taking some tutorials, and it's a great tool, and it's a good thing to learn to use. Not part of the class necessarily. Do I have animate? I'm not sure what you mean by animate, so I'm guessing I don't. Is that a different tool, or what are you referring to, Parker? I'm not sure. These are different license types for images and icons. These are all Creative Commons licenses, so those basically free to use. These are all just different license types that are all considered Creative Commons. So free to use. Do I have Adobe Animate? There you go. I've never used Adobe Animate. Okay, I think this is going to be one of the code demonstrations I want to do. Icon libraries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate what an icon library is and how it's used. So this would be chapter 11. So I'm going to open up chapter 11 homework. And I'm going to demonstrate FontAwesome. Eventually my computer catches up. There we go. So this is a FontAwesome demonstration. And so what is FontAwesome? FontAwesome is an icon library, the world's most popular and easiest to use icon set. Just got an upgrade. So we click on FontAwesome. And let's see if I have an account. I do have an account. Okay, so clearly I'm on the free plan. And so first thing you do on FontAwesome is you make an account. Clearly you don't pay for it. And you get scalable icons. And so these become icons that you can use on your site. These are new. I haven't seen duotone. That's kind of cool. So you can kind of come in here and browse. The popular ones are like Facebook. So you want to get like social media icons. You can get Facebook, so on and so forth. So different than images, right? Because, or I guess maybe the question is why, is that you put these as your font so they can scale up and change colors with your CSS. And so if you put this in an H1, it's going to have a default size. If you put it in an H2, it's going to be a different size. You can change the background color or the color, using CSS. And so what I do most of the time is I go to the documentation. So I go to the docs. Looks like they're working on a new FontAwesome 6. This is 5.15, right? The new versions will obviously have more fonts. And you can see this is done by adding class values. And so here you see these different cameras, and you can add these cameras. In this case, this is one done with an I tag. It says this icon's style prefix FAS and icon name is camera. So the prefix is FAS, and then FA camera is how you get the camera to show up. This one, using an I element to reference, this is literally the same exact code, so I don't know why they put that in there twice. But they also show how you could use a span instead of using an I, but it's typically done with either a span or an I tag. So that's how you get this into your code. It says, let's see, we like the I tag for being short, because most folks use M, right? So if you use M for your italics, then I tag is short. But it's not exactly semantic these days. So they recommend using a span to be more semantically correct. So that's good to note. So you probably want to use the span to be semantically correct. Normally, so that's the basic use, but over here is getting started. So let's click on getting started, because I'm not finding what I'm looking for. So let's click on getting started. And this is what they typically do, is they say, what are you working on? And they're going to give you a little chunk of code. I've already done this before, so maybe I'll say chapter 10 homework. I don't know. You can then create and use the kit. Right, and this kit is just going to be the code that you use to get started. Now, I've already used a kit before. If I look at this kit, they give you a little chunk of code. Okay, now this is what you need to get started. You need this script tag. I don't know. I probably made this a while ago. I don't know if it's the most recent version. So I'm gonna make a new kit. Oh, you've already used your one kit. Nope. Okay, then I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to use this one kit. And I'm going to post the script tag up in the head. And now I haven't used this in a year. Now I will go back to my search for Facebook. And I'll just click on this one. And start using this icon. See, some of them are paid, but this one is not. So they give you the code in an I tag here. So let's copy that. Let's put it in a little header here. All I did was copy it and paste it into my code. You literally don't have to change a thing. And there you see I've got the little Facebook icon. It can scale up, so if I style this and I select my I tag, let me put the monitor back on, do a little embedded style sheet here up top, can change it just like it's a font. And so you can make it big, you can make it small, you can change its colors. Very, very common tool to use is this FontAwesome. So hopefully you guys thought that was a cool little trick. I do encourage you to kind of come onto FontAwesome and kind of browse what's out there, see what's out there for free. There you go, 1,600 free icons. So FontAwesome is not the only icon library. However, I've never used these other ones. So I do think it's the most common, the most popular one. Let me show an example of using FontAwesome icons, just like I did. We've already done fave icons in this class. We've already shown you how to create fave icons in this class, so nothing new there. Okay, last slide is SVG, right? So the thing about an SVG is I would never recommend, trying to code this manually. Okay, what you want to do is you want to design the SVG graphic in the appropriate tool and then use the export feature of that tool to give you this code. Okay, it's not something that we're going to necessarily do in this class, but I just want you to realize that what an SVG image is and how it can be used. Okay, so that's the end of this lecture on images and icons. I think there are a few new concepts I'm glad we covered. Let's go ahead and stop this here. And what we're going to do next is cover some Bootstrap.